Hello everyone, welcome to a video on some coding shit I've been doing a little bit recently on actually making a game, and I found that the most important part to actually building the game, besides being able to code the system, is to actually build the tools to allow you to effectively and quickly build out the world. And today that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit about my tool, what it does, and the importance of it as well. We might start off with that, with the importance of having a good set of tools tailored to your game. Just imagine that you're trying to create, or especially if you're on a team. If you're doing it by yourself, it's a little bit different. But if you're on a team and you have an artist, animator, designer, all these kinds of stuff, you can't expect them to code things directly. You can't expect them to modify text files or XML or even binary files to some extent. That's stupid. So if you can build out a good set of tools that you can build maps in, you can create animation sets, you can do all this fun stuff, and you can give that to an artist, an animator, and it's easy to use, you'll be able to much more effectively and quickly build out your game. And I think in a lot of indie titles, the tools are overlooked often. It's not as much of a problem if you're using something like Unity or Unreal, because they have their own tool sets. And the program will probably create some kind of flow to create maps and animations and all kind of stuff inside that. But I'm doing this in my own engine, so I'm going to create my own tools. So yeah, I just wanted to go into a little bit of depth about what I'm doing, how it works, and just some of the things I personally think that I've done that are pretty cool. Your mileage may vary on that particular statement, but let's talk about data. So this particular tool operates on, I'll just load it up. It operates, I haven't got a display, I have got a display capture. So let's go to items. So you've got all these fields that you can fill out. And let's just create it on the unique identifier is something like a string that you will reference in the game to load it in. So something like, starting sword or level 1 sword. So level 1 underscore sword. If I could type properly, that'd be fantastic. Item type, we'll say it's a weapon. It is the swordy sword. This swiggity swordy. Swiggity swordy. Cool. Has some stats. We're going to say it does damage. I crashed it! I haven't finished the items yet. I thought they worked. Why did that crash? Index was out of range. Well, that's annoying. Okay. Cool. That's it's off to a rip-roaring start. Let's go to something that I've actually kind of made sure that works. Here we have a sprite sheet. Now, if you work in 3D, you might not know what a sprite sheet is. Hello, camera, can you focus? A sprite sheet is just a sheet of different sprites put together. Now, a lot of sprite sheets do packing. So in this particular sprite, every sprite is exactly 512 by 512 pixels. Power of 2 is what you want for a graphics card to be able to load in properly. I'm not going to go into that. But there's a lot of white space, a lot of wasted space. Some sprite sheets will actually pack it in and use like algorithms to figure it out, or manually draw around tiles. I cannot be bothered. I may change that, but for now I cannot be bothered. So these are just 512 by 512 sprites. It's a 3x4 thing because that's the way it came in on my sprite sheet creator online. I will be building my own at some point, but for now it's fine. And it's got a unique ID. It's the character name and the animation. The width and the height of the file, that shouldn't be changeable. That should be read-only. Whoops. This is the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. And then we've got the file in relation to the folder it's going to be in. Hope everything up is okay up there. These are just like suggestions. So this might be a bunch of different textures, like maybe it's bricks, and one brick is 1 by 1 wide, like as in one unit, and one is 2 by 1. So this will just be like, you know, a whatever suggestion kind of thing. And then you got the actual sprite sheet, which is just, an actual sprite. So now this is an animation set, so this wouldn't really be in use, but I was just testing it. And that comes out like that. So I got the name of it, I got the sprite sheet, which I've got a linker to pick it from. I got to fix that up. I haven't finished this one quite yet. The width and the height and the frame number. So if I go through this frame number, you can see it updating. So that's pretty cool. So that part was, you know, relatively simple. It's not difficult to make a form with some images, pickers, and all that kind of stuff. The thing that I think that I've done that's pretty cool is the actual way it stores data. Now, for that sprite and the sprite sheet, I've just got these 5 fields: the file name, the width, the height, and the default width and height for the sprite. Now, it's also of this class called base. Now, base is the base class for everything that's going to be serialized into my game engine, and deserialized again, obviously. Now, this here is what keeps. This is where like the base of the cool stuff happens, I should say. So I have a property changed event so that everything can be updated with each other. So that's kind of fun. Now I've disabled this warning here because I'm doing this through code injection or code generation via Foddy. If you don't know what Foddy is a bunch of weavers, which allows you to do like code gen stuff. And this happens to be a property changed weaver, which basically says if you have a property changed event handler called property changed, it will automatically set up all of the events for when all the property changes. Now, because everything that inherits base will have this event, everything that inherits base will get this for free. That's why I've set it up like this. And I'm sorry, it also has to inherit this. The only property that it actually has is the unique identifier. Everything in my game engine needs a unique identifier. Then I got the other things to mark if it's been saved or deleted. Makes probably a lot of sense. Set up the event. So that calls this function here. So if anything gets changed, just sets it up to say it's not saved. You have unsaved data. That I don't think is actually being used anymore, so I could probably dump that. Isn't okay. And this saved unique identifier is just for tracking if the unique identifier changes, because you can rename something. I just needed a way to effectively be able to do that. So that's, you know, all pretty basic. From there, got some helpers. My dogs are barking. My daughter's jumping out of bed. So it's all happening. It's all happening. I have a database. Now the database itself is kind of like a folder structure. I have a store, which is items, sprites, that kind of stuff. And then I have a dictionary of base items. So the key of the dictionary is a string, which will be the unique identifier, and the base is obviously going to be the data. Now this is just a bunch of stuff to check if things exist: saving, loading, paths, assets, which I got to work on a bit more. Assets being things like PNG files, WAV files, you know, actual binary data. So far pretty simple. It's not a lot happening there. Got some helpers. Because of the way it goes out to a file, everything needs to be on a single line. Just to, when I read it back in on the game engine side, it's a lot simpler. So this has just got some linifying and delinifying, which is, I think, a word I made up. So we'll close that. So that's all pretty simple. We'll close that because that's broken. And okay, so let's talk about the data, how it actually sits. And then I'll go into how it sort of comes to that. So this here is the sprite sheet. Now, if I open up the world builder again, it took forever. Sprite sheet. So you'll be able to see here the unique ID, and then you got the unique ID over here, file name, width, height, sprite width, sprite height. So that matches the sprite sheet properties. And how this works is this is all automatic. Everything that is loaded into the database that is of a base type, which is the only thing that can be loaded in the database, is automatically serialized and deserialized into this format. So I was going to use either a JSON serializer or an XML serializer, but I found that to be pretty wasteful in both processing power and speed. And as much as I could have done like a binary thing so that it just sort of writes out the data one by one and I just read it back in, I wanted a way for, if you needed to make a quick correction, like if you had a build on a computer tested, you go, oh, it doesn't quite look right, you know, change this one thing in this file. I wanted to be able to do that. So I've created my own serializer, and that's the bit I wanted to talk about, how it works. So I have this class called serializer, which honestly is a bit of a fucking mess. I haven't commented it at all. So as I go through this and remember how it works, I'll probably be doing that. First I have just a helper function that does a subarray. This is just so I can split things up. This is I forgot the name of it. What is it called? A extension method. That's the one. If you don't know what extension methods are in C# and you're using C#, you should definitely look them up. They are very, very fun in a very nerdy way, of course. And then I have two functions, really. I'll close all these down. So serialize and deserialize. So serialize is going from an object to a string, and deserialize is a string to an object. Now, I could probably change this so that it needs to be a base, but it doesn't really matter. So the way this works is, you've got this prefix. Now, a prefix is used in this case if you've recursed into something. So if you have say an item, which is an example of where I actually use this. An item has a stat bundle, and a stat bundle, well, that's why it's not a base. A stat bundle has a list of stats. So it's recursed into and done more things. It's not just a property that can be instantly serialized. It needs to go in and be serialized some more. So that's what the prefix does. And I don't actually have an example of that at the moment because I could probably just make one. I could just not edit the thing that broke. So let's just save that and check my, really? Okay, cool. You're just determined to make me look stupid, aren't you, computer? I know I do a good job of it by myself, so that's why that didn't work. Okay, cool. So, okay, now we have one. So we see there's a property called base stats, and it contains a list of stats which have 3 things on it. Stat class, base value, and max value. So that's recursed in 2 levels to deserialize. If this was JSON, it'd be like that, and then like that, and then like that kind of thing. So that would be base stats. I can't remember how JSON works, to be quite fucking honest, but yeah. Let's just undo it all so it doesn't come up with a change. Cool. Still recording, cool. And the rest are just, you know, pretty simple. You know, it's an enum, so just convert it to text, that's text. But this is a text box, so it actually, if you have a line break, it turns it into that CRLF $$ character thing. We've got some links and stuff, but, you know, it's pretty basic. So the way that works is, it makes sure, yeah, so if we haven't got a prefix, we're going to firstly put the data type. So let's comment this together. If we are at the beginning, add the data type. God, my dogs are going crazy. It's like they sense me recording. And it's like, fuck, let's fuck with the recording. This is running like shit now. Why are you running like complete and utter shit? Seriously, why? Why is Chrome sucking up 900 meg of my RAM? Whatever. Cool. Then we're going to go and get all of the properties. Now, if you don't know C# too well, properties are the ones that have the getters and setters, or at least one of them. So get a list of all the properties. I don't know why it's like, can you see the lag on my typing? It's really weird. So then we're going to go through all of the properties here. I'm going to check what type it is. So check the type. If it's a base link, now a base link is a thing I've written so that if you have two objects that are a base, so in the case of the sprite sheet and the static sprite, so this is the static sprite here, it's just a link to that path in the database. So instead of me having to write out, you know, this in here as the sprite sheet, I'm putting a link so that if this changes, everything linked to it also changes, which made a lot of sense to me. So do custom serialization, which is a pretty simple serialization. It just gets the toString method, which is like store/unique identifier. So this is if it's a string or it has no properties, try the toString method. So that's a pretty basic serialization method. You have a toString method, or it's a string to begin with, which we'll just use the toString method to cheat. And we also check in for this attribute for lineifying it, which I mean, I probably should be doing that anyway, but I just wanted to use attributes for the fun of it. Then we're going to go check if it's a list and do list serialization if so. Otherwise, we're going to try to go into it and serialize some more. Otherwise, dive in another level and serialize some more. So it's fairly simple the way it works. This will go in. I'm pointing at the screen. Why am I pointing at the screen? This one here is pretty simple. If it's something that can be cast to a string or has a toString method like an int or an enum or something like that, it just comes up as just that. The property name equals the data. If it's, why did I close that? If it's a list, it's actually going to go into itself again and do some more, but it does it per object. So in the case of the item, which I have closed, it's actually jumped into this list and it's given it like an array notification, notation thing here, so it can know what number is in the list. Now, it's an unordered list. It doesn't really matter what number it is. The number is just to determine, you know, the difference between them. And because this here is a stat, it actually has more stuff to serialize. So when it goes through again, it'll recurse again and then serialize some more. So that's relatively simple, the way that works. You're gonna screw off with your American spelling, you piece of shit. All right, so that should be pretty simple. The serialization part wasn't the difficult part of this process. That altogether is, you know, it's like 50 lines of code. Where it got a bit hairy was going the other way. Now, just take a drink of that. Thankfully, C# is magic. C# has a lot of magic methods to do with creating things. You can give it a string form of a class and it will go and find it. You can create dynamic objects and not worry about the type, and the type will just be magically put into a piece of data that's already typed. The kind of shit you can't do in C++. Now that has a cost associated with it, But because this is just a tool and doesn't have to be real time, I'm 100% fine with that. So let's talk about the serialization then. The serialization, this function here is the entry point for deserializing. As you can tell, it's a public, so cool for that. I do have some kind of like not data security encapsulation. So what it will do is it will split it by line. So split out the lines. And if we have no lines, obviously something gone wrong, so just return a null object. Otherwise, the first line is the type of the object. So let's go to the examples we have here. This is an item type. This is a string library. This is a static sprite, and whatever else I have. So that's pretty simple. So if the type is not correct, we're going to return null. Otherwise, create the object with the correct type. Oops, correct type. So once again, if you're not too familiar with the way C# works with this kind of magic shit, the activator, you give it a type. A type is a system class, which is, it represents a type, in case you didn't guess that. And it will actually create that object for you as an object, because everything inherits from objects. So that just magically works, which is incredible. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that object and we're going to get rid of the first line of the array, because that's the type and we don't need to deserialize that. And we're going to give it this breadcrumb. Now the breadcrumb is the antithesis, is that the right word, of the prefix. So it tells you how deep you currently are. So you know how much you have to cut off the line to get to the actual bit you're deserializing, which might not make a lot of sense, but hopefully as we get through it, it will. So let's loop through all our data. So this one's pretty obvious. If we have two equal signs in there somewhere, we've gone wrong, which means I'm probably going to have to add like a helper to get rid of any equals that need to be there. So if you have like a piece of text that says 1 equals 2, it will just crash, which is going to be fun. I'll fix that, that's fine. So the first portion is the name of the property. So once again, back to our, let's bring up our item. So the left-hand side is the property name and the right-hand side is the data. So that's what that means there. So let's just shove that over. Cool. So that's pretty simple. So what we're doing here, we're checking if we have a breadcrumb. So if we have a breadcrumb, our temporary property name needs to be modified, because the property name here that we're going to be using for the rest of this function is not going to be directly associated with this piece here. It's going to be what we actually want to write to at this level. So in this case, if it's not empty, we're going to have to remove some. And then we're going to say, if we have a dot at the end, we're going to remove that. Now the reason for that is, if you remove the breadcrumb, which will be base stats here, the first one's going to be a dot, or a period, or whatever you want to call it. So I didn't mean to sound so manly when I said that. It was like I was disgusted by the word period. After you see a kid get born, you don't get disgusted by anything anymore. But in the case of stat class here, we're going to have an equal sign, or nothing, really. So that's what that is. And then we're going to check, so if there is still a period, we need to go deeper. So if we've deserialized up to this point, there's still going to be this period here, so we have to go another level deeper. So if that's the case, we're just going to grab, like if we're here, we're just going to grab that. So we know the next thing to go into. So check if we need to go deeper. Oh, sorry, that's trim if we need to go deeper. Man, commenting is fun. And then we're going to check if it's a list. If this is a list. So if it's a list, it obviously needs to be deserialized a little bit different. You have to create a list of those objects and then deserialize them one by one. So serialize, I mean, this is pretty, at least this part here is a pretty self-explanatory bit of code. Not a list. Deserialize, not a list. I'm good at English, you'll all shut up. Where did I do I? Okay, cool. So this current here refers to not the number of the item, so not this 0 here, but what line you're currently on. Because what it's going to do is search for everything that's going to be in that list and deserialize it all at once. So it's going to go down to the end here. So it's going to add all the data in, then it's going to create a list, then it's going to go through all the data and deserialize that one by one, and then add it to the list to make sure that it goes to the entire list all at once and not going, because in the case of this one here, which I'm pointing at the screen again, we have to do this all at once because it has 3 properties that needs to be set. You can't set it one by one. It's not going to make any sense. You'll have 3 objects with 3 properties set that need to be in one. So that's what that does. So let's go through it a bit more in depth. So current is the line of the file, not the current item in the list. Okay. Total, that should be pretty self-explanatory. The index. Now the index here is used for trimming the property name. Okay. Now the altered crumb. This is a really poor choice of words, but because I called it breadcrumb, I've sort of gone with it. The altered crumb is the actual property name. So it just, in this case, it'd be stats. So the altered crumb is the property name without the whatever number. And it will decrease the index. Now, this is a little like bit of fuckery I found, that if you have a list at the top level, it fucked out a little bit, which I have it here. Like this would screw up, because it would try to remove the dot at the start. Yeah, so that just does that. Ignore that part. This is the cool bit. So we're going to create a dictionary, and we're going to go through and add all of our lines. So create dictionary, add all of the data destined for this list. So that's all the text. In this case, it'd be all of this. In this case, it'd be all of this. Fun times. Okay. So then we're going to construct the list. So once again, the activator and the generic types and all that kind of stuff in C# that you can do is pretty powerful. Like this here is allowing me to create a list with a generic type. The inner property type is, it gets it from the class. It gets to what kind of list it needs to be. In this case, it would be a list of stats. Stat bundle, I don't remember. Doesn't matter. So that's cool. Then we need to go through all data and deserialize. Now, the dictionary here, I forgot to mention. The int is the index from the list. The the list of the string is the list of all the lines. So all the lines for this index. Now that was a problem I was sort of working on in my head for a while. I don't know if this is the best solution. I'm going to say that for all of this. I don't know if any of this is the best solution, but it's how I'm doing it. And I don't really want to change it because it works quite well. In this case, there will be 3 strings in the list per index. In this case, there will be 2, and there will be 3 indexes. So 0, 1, 2, and then first item, second item, first item, second item. Fuckeryville. God, I'm an idiot. Go through. And I'm going to add you to the dictionary. And it just deserializes them one by one. And yeah, that's it. That's the hard part of that. Now, if it's not a list, it's a lot simpler. You grab the property, so grab the property and type. So if it isn't the final level, we want to put the rest of the data through as well. So I don't really have an example for this at the moment. I thought I did. So if you have a, I've tested this. I just don't have it. I got rid of what I was using for it. So if you had a class inside of a class, but it wasn't a list, it was just like more properties, that's when it would go through and deserialize some more. So if we have to go deeper, gather all data needed and deserialize. Now, this here is another really powerful C# thing. You can actually get a reference to a property in a class and set the value of it without having to actually know what type it is, what the name of it is, or I guess you have to know the name, all that kind of funny stuff, and you just sort of magically do it. So nothing here is a direct reference to anything in any of these classes. This is all magic through discovery and reflection is what it's called in C#. And then this one here, this class here is for deserializing a single piece of data. So this is your base deserialization of strings, ints, enums, decimals, my base link class, which has the custom deserializer, and anything that's missing. Like I don't have floats in here at the moment. Don't plan on using floats, but if I did, this would crash out. It would serialize, but when I went to deserialize, it would come up with an exception. I just had to add it back in on how to parse that data back. So this is pretty simple. If it's empty, it's not going to send anything because there's no point in trying to deserialize blank. That doesn't make any sense. Now this one is actually null or empty, where the rest of my string dot is nulls is white space, because generally we don't care about white space, but in the case of this, maybe we've padded a string or something like that. We don't know. Then we'll check if it's a base link. We'll check if it's a string. So this activator create instance uses the constructor. So in the case of base link, it has a constructor, which is the path, which is what this is. So the store / the name. So it'll deserialize that itself. So that's what the activator does. It actually calls a constructor, which is really fucking cool. Otherwise, we're just parsing values, which is fairly simple. Now, create object. Am I actually using this? No, I am. Okay. That's just a shortcut to use a constructor. So helper to call a constructor. Because it's a little bit of code. Call a default constructor. It is a little bit of code, and it saves me having to do it in there, I guess. I could probably break up a lot more of this into discrete functions, which I probably should, because it's a bit of a mess. But at the moment, this works pretty perfectly. Anything I throw at it will come out in this form over here. That's exactly what I want. And that was one important thing I wanted to do. I wanted to make this all magic. I didn't want to have to create serialized and deserializers for every piece of data, because it's going to be so much. Like, think of a game, even a 2D game. You have, or well, I'm making an RPG, so think about that. Like, you have weapons, items, armors, characters, dialogue, audio, sprites, sprite sheets, animations, all that bullshit, like scripted events and worlds and maps. And I just could not be asked writing custom serializers and deserializers in C# manually. And then when I have to do it, I'm going to have to do it in C++. C++ doesn't, I don't think, have this kind of magic. And if it did, I don't think I'd want to use it, because the whole point of using C++ and my own engine is I want it to be quick. So hopefully I can do something with that and make it a bit more fun for C++. Maybe some macros or something, but we'll see. But yeah, that's the main part of like what I wanted to talk about with this serial, the world builder, like the tool I've got. But if I was to sort of go into a bit more, a couple of other things I've got that I kind of want to show. And these are just little quality of life things that I think make a lot of sense. So I have this thing called a string library. Now, I believe a lot of games use something similar to this, where if you're making, especially in an RPG, it makes a lot of sense. If you're making a town, or you're making a character, you don't want to hard code that character's name. It doesn't make any sense. You'd want to have a reference to something like get character's main character's name, get enemy's name, or something like that. This is the same kind of thing. You can create a list of strings. So in this case, I got a library called towns. I've got town 1 is going to be called Selvage Flats, and the city is going to be called Iranark. I got to fix this, and then if I want to go into items, and I want to give this item some flavor text. This was found in the junkyard in, and I want it to be Selvage Flats, but I might want to change the name for Selvage Flat later. So I want to make a reference to it. So I click where I want it, and I go town 1. And that creates a link to town 1. Now, at the moment, in the world builder, there's no way for me to go, what is this? I want to do something like that, but we'll get to that. When this gets read in to the game, this will be automatically replaced. So it's going to go, okay, town/town1 with the % signs around it. That's going to be a link. Let's go grab the data and replace it as we load it. So that's one thing I've done here. We won't save that. The other thing you might notice is like trail of breadcrumbs up here when I click into things. I mean, that's a pretty basic thing I've done, but that's very helpful. Things like this thing, this database thing is a custom user control I've made. So this handles newing, saving, adding, deleting, all that kind of stuff. And also that, whoa, what did I break? Alright, whatever. Yay for crashes on screen. So if I do this and go back, it goes, you have unsaved data. It handles all that. It handles tracking unsaved data and then discarding the unsaved data and all that kind of stuff. Because I really couldn't be bothered making a list every time. That seemed stupid. I also have this asset browser that I've made. This is going to have relative paths because I need that for the game to run. I don't want it to have an absolute path. That makes no sense. So this automatically does all that. And this can be used anywhere. It has filters for images, audio, and text files. So that's fun. I do want to do a preview window, but at the moment I don't have that. Oh, this is meant to break here. So this was just me testing the serializer. So you can see the output there and it reading it back in straight away to make sure it works. This will crash if it's wrong. So I'm just sort of like adding things and removing things and seeing what happens. And yeah, I think that's about it. So if you are, I haven't got a file menu. I don't know why I'm trying to click it. if you are a game programmer or a budding game programmer and you're thinking about enlisting other people's help, or even if you're not doing games, even if you're doing any kind of thing, see if you can make yourself a tool to do repetitive work, like creating stuff like this. If you are doing it in a text file manually, that's a no-no. You're a programmer, you should know better. If you are offloading work to people who are not necessarily tech savvy, but not programmers, who can't be relied upon to do things correctly in text files and stuff, make a tool. Because they're going to check in some data for you, and it's going to break everything, and you're going to spend an hour trying to do it when you should have just made the tool in the first place. I haven't actually programmed anything in the game engine yet for this game. Well, extremely little of the actual game. I've done like a very, very minor inventory system and a very, very minor item system. That's it. There is nothing else I've programmed for this game. It was much more important to make the tool first. So then I can delegate some of this work to people who are going to help me, and I can go work on actually making those things work while they actually make the world for me. Because being that I am designing the game myself as well, I'm sort of just writing notes down. I can get other people to sort of improve, put it in the game in a way that's going to work. I'm actually writing it all in a book, doing it all manually. So that's all I wanted to talk about. I hope I didn't ramble too much, and I hope you gained something from this and a new appreciation for just the simple tools you can make, and a little bit of a dive into my psyche about how excited I get about stupid shit like creating a serializer myself that actually works really well. I was so proud of myself that it worked. So I was just flying by the seat of my pants making that work. Very little help from Google and very little help from anyone else, sort of all in my brain, sort of stream of consciousness coding, and that was really fun for me. So I'm going to leave it there. If you got this far, you have incredible patience with me, and I thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.